Hey guys, it's Julesy, and we all struggling through this allergy season, baby. The pollen is trying to take your girl down, but I'm very grateful that the universe allowed me to get through my 36th birthday last month or last week. I don't know, by the time we put this up, it low key might be April. My birthday was March 25th. However, I'm grateful that I got through it with no allergies acting up at all, and I was outside. And I'm super excited that Google Applied Digital Skills is sponsoring this portion of the video. They have a website where you can join as a student, teacher, learner, young professional, and take online digital courses. And I really love it because with the theme that I've been really kicking into, and I don't know if people are receiving it, I think people are, some may not. They also have a course about online safety and digital well-being. I actually have it pulled up here. Build healthy digital habits, create a responsible blog with Google Sites, avoid online scams, evaluate credibility of online sources. Oh, that's a good one. Yes. Obviously, my focus is going to be on the digital skills and learning how to be a informed consumer on the internet because I know we try to frame it as like, oh, the elderly people are getting their identities stolen because of this prince from some country in West Africa is calling them and telling him to send them money, but also it's gotten a lot harder for everyday consumers, for us that live on the internet, for young people, for millennials, to have to navigate where our sources are coming from as mis and disinformation campaigns have become very slick and savvy. So I love this. For wherever you are at in life, the Applied Digital Skills has a course for you. If you want to take a writing course, if you want to learn how to start a blog, if you want to enhance your resume, whether it's for college or for a career, if you want to supplement your educational courses, if you want to give your kids something to do with their time that's educational and using their mind, ooh, that rhyme, we good with this. We smooth with this. I will have all the links down below in the description box for you. So thank you to Google Applied Digital Skills for sponsoring this portion of the video. I really love this idea of, taking a course so you can learn how to create a safer, kinder digital landscape. And that's really what I have been encouraging in my videos. However, some of the comments have really been pushing back, particularly around my video on stigmatizing shame, and then my follow-up video around the term of high value and how that's actually used to dispose of people. Responses that time and time again, especially on the stigmatizing shame video I received, was about accountability. Accountability. I thought it was so interesting that in a video talking about how Black women go through a constant misrecognition and a stigmatizing shame, we are born into a crooked room, right? And we're constantly told that we are wrong and not that the room is crooked. And so it's not that no one or we don't ever get a focus on dismantling whatever aspect of the system that is oppressing us, but that a lot of our intra-community rhetoric, right? Word to hortense spillers, that we have absorbed this white supremacist language. And what's interesting to me about the term of accountability is that people are calling for accountability when I'm talking about shame. And so what I identify as shame, and I know people are focusing on one content creator because I used a clip of him in that video. So the minions who are not on the payroll have come out. There are so many content creators of multiple identities within the Black community. There are Black women, there are Black men, there are Black queer and trans folks who have built large audiences, who are posting multiple times a week, multiple times a day, who are making a great amount of money and building solid audiences off of engaging in this sort of stigmatizing shame. And I focus on it from the angle of Black women because that is the identity that I firmly sit in. But I will acknowledge that Black folks, and particularly Black poor people, economically disadvantaged, Black queer folk, Black trans folk, and Black women and Black men, we do receive this ongoing stigmatizing shame. And that a lot of these terms that have really come to focus on the transactional aspects of relationships really seek to dispose of people. And often the people that are going to be disposed or the less privileged folk who do not sit into the binary silos that we have deemed as, whether are you skinny? Do you have a certain complexion? Do you have a certain hair texture? Do you have a certain economic level? Do your teeth look a certain way? You know, all these markers of wealth that we have absorbed, we seek to really dispose of Black folks that don't fit into those markers, even though societally we have an uphill battle of trying to fit ourselves into what are essentially our Europeanized standards. I could get into this all day. So I think it's interesting that when I'm calling these things out, people are holding on to these standards by saying that we need to be allowed to hold people accountable. And so what I want to do is for us to dial back and let's have a discussion about what accountability actually is. And do we even have a framework for those of us that are clinging to this term and clinging to our right to hold people accountable? Do we have a framework for the accountability? I think it's really important for us to build out definitions of what we're referring to when we talk about any sort of justice, right? Because that's really what we're getting. We're talking about, a form of justice on a really intimate level. In that framework, we have to be very clear about the language that we use. Who are we holding accountable? How are we holding them accountable? And what is the end game or solution that we're seeking in this process of accountability? And so when I see people say, oh no, you're just saying when I talk about we should, be conscious of the language that we use. We should be conscious about how we talk to each other. We should not seek to dispose of people, and that we should not be investing in this stigmatizing shame when not even just talking about other people, but when talking about ourselves, right? Because a lot of the ways this disposing or stigmatizing shame manifests is that we dispose of ourselves first, right? We shame ourselves first. And so when we're talking about accountability with regards to being able to use shame as a tool for accountability, we have to say, okay, well, what else is in that toolbox? And what is that toolbox actually building out? And when will we say that those tools have completed the job? So the first thing with accountability is not the pursuit of power and domination over other people. This is a term that I use a lot. I'm constantly talking about power and domination because a lot of the things that I see, especially on the Black digital landscape here on YouTube and across Instagram and social media, I see a lot of language within the Black digital landscape that seeks to revitalize, that seeks to heighten, that seeks to secure power and domination over other people. There's a lot of ways that we invest in power and domination. And one of the books that I love to quote because we read it in the book club and it was just such a fun, engaging community read is Bell Hooks' All About Love, right? And in chapter, I believe I want to say chapter 2 or 3, she's taught the chapter called Justice, which you would think would talk about accountability, would talk about how do we restore and repair each other. But the chapter Justice is actually about children. Because the part of our community that gets the least amount of justice and faces the most trauma and violence is children. So I love that Bell Hooks, talking about love started off with this idea of justice, but then she builds out on this idea of calling us to a loving ethic. Because what we've been taught is love. And we're not talking just about intimate partnerships, about who is your boyfriend, girlfriend, wife, or therefore, but just even in our families, our friendships, our acquaintances, our interactions, right? We've been taught that love relies, again, on transactional aspects, on what can this person materially provide and give to me, and then how can I become more dominant in my position based on the people that are in my life. And Bell Hooks is actually calling us to invest in a loving ethic. A love ethic we learn to value loyalty and a commitment to staying bonds over material advancements. And one quote that I was really thinking in this chapter of values and living by a loving ethic is where Bell Hooks says there's a gap between the values they claim to hold and their willingness to do the work of connecting thought and action, theory and practice to realize these values and thus create a more just society. I'm calling out that quote because I think that's what's happening when people are talking about accountability. Accountability actually takes work and labor. If you, as an individual, are going to hold anybody accountable, it takes your labor because you think about, we could take this again back to children. You think a child does something bad, right? And you want the child to understand what they did was wrong. So whatever choice, and I don't want to use the term punishment because that's what I actually want us to get away from, because I think we're relying on this idea of, oh, well, I punish the child, right? I either put them on punishment or I'll take a more carceral approach and I beat them, right? The child will get a spanking. I grew up in a household, my parents did spank, but also like particularly my dad spent a lot of time talking to us and explaining to us. And that's a lot of work. It's patience. It's coming to your own understanding. You know, he would have to prepare what he was going to say to us as kids. You know, pull out the Bible, make us read it. We tend to have to do like write a paper or something and then give it back in. You know, we would have a process that my parents would have to oversee and implement, which takes their labor, to ensure that within this moment of accountability for me as a child, that I also had an understanding, that I also didn't repeat my actions again. I really do appreciate the patience that my parents had in my childhood. And I wonder if when people are talking about accountability, are they thinking about the labor that they have to invest in actually holding people accountable? Because accountability is not power and dominating a person. It is not standing over some person who you do not have any proximity to and saying you are wrong and therefore you are not worthy. There is nothing about those sentiments that procures accountability, right? Because accountability means that we are having a responsibility. It means that we are shifting paradigms. It means that through accountability, we can have a process where people can be repaired and or restored. On my Patreon, I did an interview with Bree Reed, who is a part of my book club Syllabi cohort. We were reviewing Adrienne Marie Brown's We Will Not Cancel Us, which is a book about transformative justice, right? And one of the things that Bree said in the interview, which was a really, really insightful interview, is that when we even talk about community, that we have to be very specific about who is community, right? And Bree was just calling attention to how we tend to assume that people are with our community because they share our identity, right? And so even those of us, and that was a call out for myself, even when I'm constantly talking about building community and being kinder people and being in communion with folks, who am I actually in communion with? And do those people even want to be in community with me, right? So we're talking about accountability. Well, who are you actually holding accountable? And do you actually have proximity to those people is what I'm trying to say politely. This idea that by engaging in content that disposes, that disparages, that talks down and tells you that you are valuable over these people who you never really interact with in real life, who you have no actual proximity to, who you are not in actual community with, that is somehow you holding them accountable. Many of you do not have the ability to hold someone like myself accountable because you do not have literal access to me. Because I command an audience, it is more complicated for somebody to hold me accountable. I'm not saying that is a good thing, because power dynamics definitely come into play about who do you even get to hold accountable. And so rather than just throw this term around because you don't like what I said in a video about stigmatizing shame, I really want to encourage people to think about what does a framework of accountability actually look like, because it is important, right? Because there is a power dynamic that makes it hard for us to hold a wide range of people actually accountable. I don't think that any of the people that I have in mind when I talk about high value, when I talk about mis and disinformation on the internet, when I talk about disposing and disparaging people, I don't talk about accountability because I don't think I could hold those people accountable, right? One, I don't want to invest that kind of labor. What would be the framework? I am encouraging the audience of people, though, to think about the media that they're ingesting, to think about how do they think about themselves, how do they think about each other, and to invest in the complex action of kindness. That is what I'm doing. One of the dangers of this messaging that constantly seeks to shame, to dispose, to disparage of people is that it's all fun and games when it's on a YouTube video. But how are we absorbing this content, ingesting this messaging, and then employing it in our real life? Because what I do worry about are the people that live within the households of people who think that this messaging is funny and insightful. And I'm not, like, there's not one individual I'm thinking about here. There's a really wide landscape of digital messaging that we find as humor, we find as funny? How are we dealing with the children in our household? How are we dealing with the people that do end up partnering with us? To be honest, all of us on the internet, when we enter into relationships with other people, have to unlearn various aspects of toxicity that we have picked up on the internet, myself included. I wonder, someone as myself who has a pretty broad range of content that I absorb from the internet versus someone who has a much more focused what they're absorbing on the internet, right? Who is constantly, like, as a black man, watching all this content that tells him that black women are just gold diggers, that black women should be wearing bonnets, that black women with kids are wrong. So how are you then treating the black women in your families who are single mothers, or even the black women on the internet who are constantly talking about men who are not of a certain economic status being disposable, who are talking about black feminists who are just bitter, ugly folk, also disposable? Oh, if you look like a man, you masculine. So you therefore, if black woman has any sort of whatever standard we are saying is a masculine feature or masculine tendencies, also disposable. If you are trans, we need to keep you out of this space that we have. We could talk about it on the internet all day, but how does it actually impact people on the ground that you deal with in real life? That is a big concern of mine, that this messaging is so subversive in encouraging a casual violence to happen to people. And like, we understand how we have in our day-to-day lives enacted with casual violence and casual trauma, where things have just happened to you and it was just like, it just happened, right? It happened with people that you're familiar with, it happened with people that you knew, whether you're at work, whether with your friends, whether with partners. And I'm not talking about, oh, like somebody came and punched you in your face, right? But someone came into your life and lied to you in a very destructive manner. And that is a very traumatic experience to happen when you believed how someone presented themselves and it turns out they were someone completely different. Right? Or you're at work or in the classroom and somebody undermines you, like very consciously seeks to undermine you and make life more difficult with you. Some of us have the misfortune of having parents who are very manipulative, who do things that are damaging to us and our personhood. That's what I'm talking about. Like, you know, and maybe I don't want to get too hyperbolic with it and talk about like violence, but like, yeah, like a casual trauma that just kind of happens to us, not because of what we did, but because of what other people have decided to do to us. And if we have all this messaging and all this language that seeks to say that people are disposable, how does that dismantle? How does that slow down? How does that lessen the casual trauma that already trots itself into each and every one of our lives? That's my whole point. Thanks for watching. I would love to hear, have you actually thought about the frameworks of accountability? How have you held people accountable? Who are you actually able to hold accountable? I would love to hear your examples, and maybe we can all learn from each other and have a respectful comment. I will see you on the other side. Deuces.